Okay, so last class we were talking about the difference between the preterite and the imperfect. What I need to show you today is how to actually form the preterite tense, and we're going to talk about mostly regular verbs, maybe a few irregulars as well. So when you're forming the preterite tense, you do the same thing that you did in the present. If you have a verb like tomar, which is an AR verb, you take the AR off so that you're left with actually, I'll do a box, I think. Okay, so that you're left with tome. Tome is your stem, and you're going to keep that throughout. If you'll notice, I keep the tome all the way through, and these are the endings that you're going to add. So tomar is to take, or it can be to drink. So maybe I want to say like yesterday I had tea with my dinner. Ayer tomé té helado con mi cena. Then I might ask you, ¿tomaste té helado con tu cena ayer? Or I might say he had tea with his dinner yesterday. Él tomó té helado con su cena ayer. Nosotros tomamos té helado con nuestra cena ayer. So you can go through, so you add, these are the endings that you add to say that different people drank iced tea with their dinner yesterday. So it's tomé, tomaste, tomó, tomó, tomamos, tomasteis, tomaron, tomaron. And you'll notice this time ER and IR verbs actually get the same endings this go round, which makes things a little bit nicer for us. So if I wanted to say, you do the same thing again that you did in the present tense for an ER verb, you get rid of the ER and you keep, whoops, I don't want to do that, and you keep your stem, com, and then you add the following endings to it. So if I wanted to say, yesterday I ate pizza for lunch, ayer comí pizza para el almuerzo, or I might ask you, ¿comiste tu pizza para el almuerzo? Or I might say, he ate pizza, él comió pizza para el almuerzo. We ate pizza. Nosotros comimos pizza. Did y'all eat pizza? ¿Comisteis vosotros pizza ayer para el almuerzo? Or comieron, they ate pizza. Ellos comieron pizza ayer para el almuerzo. And so you'll see over here, IRs, you do the same thing. You get rid of the IR ending. You keep your stem, bib. And if I want to say, I lived last year, el año pasado yo viví en una casa cerca de la escuela. So last year I lived in a house near the school. Ayer viví en una casa cerca de la escuela. ¿Dónde viviste tú el año pasado? Where'd you live last year? Él vivió en otra ciudad. He lived in another city. So these are the endings that you add, and you'll notice they're exactly the same. So it's viví, viviste, vivió, vivió, vivimos, vivisteis, vivieron, vivieron. Okay, so we're going to do practice in just a minute, but before we do that, there's one spelling change that I have to talk about. The three verbs, verbs that end in C-A-R, G-A-R, and Z-A-R, we have to be careful with when we're conjugating them. And in part, that has to do with C has two sounds. In Spanish, it can either make an S sound, a soft C sound, or it can make a hard C sound, the K sound, the K sound. And so whatever your verb sounds like in its infinitive form, that's the sound that we want to keep throughout. So for example, if we have buscar, it makes that hard K sound. But if I go through and conjugate buscar, okay, so if I go ahead and conjugate the verb buscar right here, like here's my AR endings. If I want to add those endings to buscar, this is what I would get. I have buscar, and then if I just do what I'm supposed to, which is to take this ending off, okay, and keep my stem and start adding endings to that stem. Okay, if I do that, I've got busc, and then I would add the E, all right? And then I would keep my busc and add my aste, and keep my busc and add my O, and keep my busk and add my O, and still keep and add my AMOS, keep my busk and add my astes, keep my buscaron, and buscaron. Okay, let me move all these a little bit so that okay, all right, so if I do this, the problem is you'll notice that when I do this, I've got C next to an A, and here I've got C next to an O, C next to an O, C next to an A. Well, if you remember, C next to an O, an A, or U keeps the K sound, which is the sound I've got up here, because this is next to an A as well, so I've got buscar. But C next to an E changes to a S sound. So if I did this normal, what I would have is busé, buscaste, buscó, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, buscaron, buscaron. So everything still sounds like buscar except for busé. Well, it would make more sense, or it would sound better if I had busqué, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, buscaron. And to get that busqué, I have to make a spelling change because C isn't going to give me that. So what you do is you would change, what you really would want to write is change your C to a QU, and then that gives me busqué. So I'm actually going to do that instead. Okay, so changing your C to a QU before adding the E helps you conserve the K sound. Okay, and you do that for any verb that ends in CAR, or any CAR verb. So it could be buscar, and they've given you explicar or sacar. Any verb that would change its K to a S, we're going to change to a QU. And we only do it in the yo form because everywhere else is not a problem because C is next to an O or an A, so we can keep the C. It's just in the yo that we have to make the change. Okay, before adding the helps you conserve the sound. Okay, so now, okay, so if we want to conjugate a GAR verb, we're going to run into a similar problem. So if I take the verb, I have the verb, let's actually make it bigger. Llegar, what I would normally do if I'm conjugating it is to take the AR off. Okay, and that leaves me with the stem yeg. Okay, and I would keep that throughout when I'm conjugating. Oops. Okay, so I would keep my yeg, and I'm supposed to add an E here, and then an ASTE, and then an O. And then an AMOS, and an ASTEIS, and then an ARON. Okay, so when I do that, I end up with the same problem again. My G in my original verb in its infinitive form makes a G sound. Well, that's not a problem down here, because here it's GA, so that, oops, so that keeps the G sound, llegaste. Here it's GO, that keeps the G sound, llegó. Here it's GA, that keeps the G sound, llegamos. Here it's again, everywhere it's GA, and that keeps the G sound, llegaron. But up here, I don't have that, I have a GE. Well, G next to an E changes the sound of G from a G to a H, so I end up with yehe. So it would have, if I did it normal, follow the pattern without changing anything, I'd have llegar, yehe, llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegastes, llegaron. Well, in Spanish, they prefer to conserve the sound. So what I can do to conserve the sound and get llegué, which sounds more like llegar, llegaste, llegué, llegar, llegaste, llegó, which sounds more like the way I'm pronouncing all the other words, is to put a U between my G and my E. And I would have llegué. So, changing your G to a GU before adding the E helps you to conserve the hard G sound. Okay. Okay, and lastly we have ZAR verbs. And if you remember from when we were making the words luz and lapis plural, those are words that ended in Z. You had to change your Z to a C before you added the ES, and that's because in Spanish they don't like to end up with a Z next to an E. So if I have the verb almorzar, okay, what I'm supposed to do to conjugate is to get rid of this AR and to keep my stem, almorz, and then I would add the endings. Okay, so if I do that, if I conjugate the verb out following the rules, what I end up with essentially in the end, everything's okay, but in the first person, I would end up with a Z next to an E. In fact, let's just highlight that part, which I can't have. So what I'm going to do for ZAR verbs, just what I did when I make words that end in Z plural, is I'm going to change my Z to a C before I add the E. So instead of writing almorce with a Z, I write it with a C. Almorce. Okay, and you would do that for all of your verbs that end in ZAR.